how are you finding the slightly enhanced meditation instructions?
I like them. It's very helpful.
Yeah, they relate directly to the Satipatthana, the Anapanasati Sutta. That's why I waited until we went through those two suttas as a Sangha before I added the new instructions, but I've been wanting to do that for a while, so glad you find it helpful. Four Noble Truths. Siddhartha Gautama, the boy who will become the Buddha, was born in his father's kingdom, a small kingdom in northern India, southern Nepal, right on the border. And from his earliest memories, despite having everything any kid could ever want, he found his life unsatisfying. He even remembers a time when he was 5 years old, when he was so frustrated with his lack of satisfaction that he decided to sit under a tree and focus on his breath until his mind calmed. That's just what he did. And he will remember that 21 years later, kind of out of the same frustration of not understanding what was going on. It was common in India at that time and many other places, Greece and Rome and a few other established societies, that seeking the truth was an honorable thing to do. In fact, it was often supported by the local society. Seeking the truth in that sense usually meant looking for answers to the big questions. Who am I? Where do I come from? Where am I going when I die? Where did all this come from? Who started this? The search for God. The Buddha had the motivation for the Buddha's seeking, the reason why he left the palace at 29 years old and started seeking, was not to answer the great questions. He wanted to understand, if it was possible, the nature of human suffering, the nature of human disappointment, and if there was a way to end that. He started traveling around northern India. I know you've heard the story quite a few times, but it lays the foundation. He started traveling around northern India, studying with the foremost spiritual teachers of his time, and those teachings were based on the Vedas, the precursor to modern Hinduism. And he mastered those teachings very quickly, so quickly and so at such a high level that those teachers, Alara Kalama and Uddaka Ramaputta, tried to encourage the Buddha to become their representative and start teaching their Dhamma around northern India and southern Nepal. The Buddha didn't do that because he found that their teachings did not lead to the understanding that he was seeking. He wasn't concerned with the big questions because he saw those, as his understanding developed, as simply a distraction from the truth. I don't want to get into it. Debbie brought this up last week too. I don't want it to sound like I'm religion bashing all the time, because I'm not. It's just the point is that the Buddha seeked and found out something that really has nothing to do with religion. It has nothing to do with the great questions, or it has nothing to do with the great answers that religion hopes to provide, such as overarching spiritual system that governs everything and that might create the situations that we're in. Something that we might appease to ease our suffering rather than take responsibility for that. The Buddha rejected that because he wanted to find a way, if it was possible, for individual human beings to establish and develop their own peace and happiness based on their own understanding. And that understanding, after 6 years of arduous study and doing some very severe ascetic practices, that understanding the Buddha discovered. And he described it this way in his very first teaching, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. You know how I like to say that. The Buddha's words. Now, this teaching now is his very first teaching to the 5 friends that he was wandering around northern India all that time, putting in tremendous effort, all of them, into developing understanding of the great questions. Now awakened, the Buddha described this awakening to his friends. Vision arose, discernment arose, insight arose, knowledge arose within me. It's an important statement there, within me, of things never heard before. He's declaring that he has a completely new and fresh understanding of himself in relation to the world. The truth of suffering has been comprehended. He's making this declaration to his friends. I understand the nature of suffering. The origination of dukkha, of stress, has been abandoned. He's declaring from that recognition, I've been able to abandon all of my own individual contributions to stress, to suffering. The cessation of stress, of dukkha, has been experienced. Again, he's making the declaration, I have had this experience. You can listen to me because I've had the actual experience. I know what I'm talking about. And then he makes this declaration, which would guide his teachings and everything he would teach for the next 45 years. The Eightfold Path leading to the cessation of stress has been developed within me. Pretty powerful statement, isn't it? And in that statement is a description of the Four Noble Truths. Dukkha arises, craving originates, and clinging perpetuates dukkha. Its cessation of that process is possible, and the path leading to that cessation is the Noble Eightfold Path. So the Buddha would spend the next 45 years of his life teaching that profound understanding. To some, understanding suffering would seem almost pointless. Strategies to deal with suffering, isn't there? There's another piece of chocolate cake. There's a long conversation. Today there's Facebook. Back then there might be another glass of wine or something like we do today.
Another question to ask.
Another question to ask, like Vacha, thank you for bringing that, like Vacha go to the wanderer that kept coming in and out of the Buddha's life, asking him the great questions. Who am I? Where am I going? One of the questions that Vacha go would hope to catch the Buddha on is what happens to you when you die? Where do you go? And he put it right to the Buddha's face. And the Buddha would sit calmly and say, Vacha go, it's your questions that are confusing you. Let go of the questions. They don't lead to the goal of understanding, much like what Debbie brought up last week about a very well-focused Dhamma, to avoid getting caught up in chasing after questions that have no real answers or no useful answers. What's most important is what's occurring to me right now in my mind in relation to the environment I'm in. And so we use shamatha vipassana meditation as one factor of that Eightfold Path to quiet the mind. Shamatha means to develop a tranquil mind and to gain insight into the 3 marks of existence, the impermanent nature of the environment that we live in, the misunderstanding of a self, the not self characteristic in relation to that environment, and because of that misunderstanding, the resulting stress and suffering, dukkha, the 3 marks of existence. So by developing an understanding of who I am, who I actually am, the word anatta was a common word during the Buddha's time that he used and adapted because it was a common word to teach something completely different than what the word was used for at the time. And in fact, that the way the word was used at that time was to say that there's no such thing as a self. And the interpretation that most of, again, I don't mean to bash it, but most of modern Buddhism uses. There's no such thing as a self. We're in this grand void and everything is empty and there's a great nothingness that we're all a part of. That's not what the Buddha used that word to mean, even though that was the teaching based on the Vedas. And it's interesting that most of modern Buddhism has something more in common with the Vedas, which will become modern Hinduism, than it does with what the Buddha actually taught. But again, that was a subtle problem even during the Buddhist time because it was such a prevalent belief. And that belief in a nothingness based on creationism is interesting, isn't it? Because what are we caught up in if we're stuck in these views of nothingness, yet here I am? How do we explain it? We get caught up in the feedback loop that the Buddha described in the Nagara Sutta that we talked about often here. The Buddha used the term anatta to simply say that the views that you're holding of yourself do not accurately reflect a self. They're not a self. So anatta in that sense means not a self, not non-self or no self. And that points directly to the Dhamma. If what's causing the unsatisfactory experience of my life is rooted in a misunderstanding of who I am, it would make sense that to end that disappointment would be to discover who I am. And that's what the Four Noble Truths are for. To shine reality on the three marks of existence, on what constitutes this thing that's experiencing life, this thing that seems to be, when you start looking at the self-referential ego self, anatta, that seems to be insatiable in its desire for satisfaction and its intense desire to avoid anything that might take away from its satisfaction. That's dukkha. That's the ongoing preoccupation with dukkha, with stress. The Buddha could nearly as accurately describe the First Noble Truth as there is distraction, because it is the preoccupation with dukkha, with maintaining and establishing and maintaining that which fulfills us, which gives us happiness or sensory satisfaction, and to avoid anything that might take away from that. So the Buddha, upon his awakening, and even in this teaching, the first teaching, describes suffering this way. Birth is suffering. He's not describing the actual experience of being born as suffering, but what he's describing immediately is simply as a consequence of having a human life, suffering occurs. It's inescapable, so stop running away from it and stop trying to solve the problem through wrong views. He continues by saying sickness is suffering, aging is suffering, death is suffering. Not getting what you want, not getting what is desired is suffering. Receiving what is undesired is suffering. There's that feedback loop caught in sensory input, isn't it? I got to get everything I want, and I got to avoid anything that might take away from that. And then he would always conclude that. There'd be some other qualifications in there, but he would always conclude the description of dukkha by saying, in short, the five clinging aggregates are suffering. The five clinging aggregates of form, feeling, perceptions, mental fabrications, and consciousness meaning thinking rooted in ignorance, describes the ongoing personal experience of suffering. It's the vehicle for suffering that we all are a part of until we develop understanding. Upon the Buddha's awakening, he awakened to something called dependent origination, which states, from ignorance of Four Noble Truths, all manner of confusion, deluded thinking, and suffering arises. So he taught in his very first teaching what you all read last week, the Four Noble Truths. And that is the foundation and established these truths as his platform for what he would teach for the rest of his life. By diminishing or embellishing or ignoring the Four Noble Truths in any way, diminishes the entire Buddhist teachings and allows for continued ignorance. It's a very subtle and powerful strategy, even within Dhamma practice, to pick and choose what we want, to continue to ignore our own ignorance. So we can meditate all we want. We might think that we're practicing mindfulness a lot. We're really getting into mindfulness, but we disregard the other 6 factors of the Eightfold Path. We're not likely to awaken, are we? The Buddha taught a complete practice rooted in the Eightfold Path and explained and established in Four Noble Truths. And that is the guidance. Let me put it this way. One of the most remarkable things that I've come to understand about what this awakened human being taught is that everything I need to understand and develop is within the framework of the Eightfold Path and as one aspect of Four Noble Truths. It's remarkable. And when you have an understanding of the Four Noble Truths, and you have to in order to follow what I'm about to say, you realize that it is the answer to all of the ills, and it is the answer to the great questions. Because when we finally develop the Eightfold Path and awaken, meaning gain full human maturity, we understand what's most important to hold in mind. And what's most important to hold in mind is looking at the world from right view. And the Buddha described right view this way. Right view understands dukkha. And it understands it at a deep and profound and penetrative level. He describes an awakened human being as someone who is unbound or free from clinging. Most importantly, clinging to wrong views that establish a self that is prone to confusion, delusion, and suffering. And that points to then what is the refined mindfulness that's developed through the Eightfold Path most useful for? Is to remember that each and every moment we are in the process of becoming. And if that becoming is framed by the refined mindfulness of the Eightfold Path, we can continue to become awakened. And if we continue to ignore our own ignorance, we can only become more ignorant. And that really comes down to the choice we have in each and every moment. That's where the framework of the Eightfold Path comes in. So we can develop right view and see things clearly as our life unfolds. To talk for this morning. Thank you. So I'd like to go around the room. Yeah, any questions about what I just said before we go around the room? You all got that? Good. Mm-hmm. What I'd like to hear is, do you see the Four Noble Truths the way I just described it? And do you see that the Eightfold Path is the path to be integrated to develop awakening? And if not, any questions you have or why you don't think that way? Kevin, good to see you.
Good to see you. I'll be honest, I didn't read the chapter. I will read it. But I think that I did experience Four Noble Truths in a few ways this week. It's an interesting week. Matt, many of you know, and I had some unfortunate news that we lost a friend that goes back to our childhood. So there was a service for that, and great. Having been there, going to an event like that with someone from the Sangha was unique because it was a profound experience of the First Noble Truth. We lost a friend who's under 40 years of age. That's a tough thing for anybody. And to understand profoundly, I think Matt and I were able to understand that this is dukkha occurring, and to see a lot of confusion when asking questions on sort of not being comfortable the way things are, wanting things to be different, right?
Yeah.
Which would be the second noble truth of clinging and craving, wanting things to be different, wanting to know why, wanting to know what they could have done or that other chance to talk to this person. But it was a profound experience to see that. So to be able to see that arising on a personal level, not even to use that word, but to see the elimination of that stress, to understand that this is dukkha arising, dukkha passing, and the way that we could best exemplify the Eightfold Path was to show up, say the right things that we could say if there was anything to say. If not, maybe it was to be respectful and be a noble silence, and to say goodbye to our friend. It wasn't the way that I wanted to see him. I haven't seen him in 20 years, but it's you don't always get to have that chance. So did the best I could with the chapter, not having read it. So.
You did. Thank you for sharing that. That's how it should be. You found a refuge in the Dhamma, in one of life's most difficult situations. Losing a friend or a loved one, and able to maintain a mind of equanimity but also feeling what is appropriate to feel, sadness and all the rest of it, but not getting caught up in why or what could I have done or any of that, because you understand, just like the Buddha described when he described suffering. Death is suffering. It's not just suffering for the person that's died. It's suffering for all of us because of the common human experience. And when we understand that, we understand, even though, and I understand that, I talked to Matt about it, I understand the circumstances were quite tragic. Even in a very tragic situation, it's still part of dukkha. And so we understand it. It doesn't mean that it's fine and we're going to be happy going to awake. We act appropriately, and we don't lose our minds. We're able to maintain perspective. And that can give us an even greater appreciation of what's occurring in the moment. And your response to go there and be a comfort to other people is the most appropriate response. So thank you for sharing that. I'll move on. Jen, good to see you this morning.
Hi, good to see you. I like Kevin did not. I literally sat down and was like, oh, I didn't do my homework. Yeah, I'm glad I'm going through this again. Because it is really helpful in moving through life.
Yeah.
I don't really have anything else to say today.
That's well said. Thank you. Jay, good to see you this morning.
Thanks. I read through this section this morning early, and I think I get the Four Noble Truths. I've got no problem with them. I experience them daily. I think the Eightfold Path is something I can try and work on continually. But in the end, I'm still you can't avoid suffering and clinging and all this stuff, and there's a paradox there. You can't avoid it. You may know about it. It's going to happen. So to me, I just kind of based myself in all the things that you're not supposed to, like enjoying good food and enjoying, life as best I can. And, I may not achieve enlightenment in this lifetime or whatever, but I'm going to try and get through things in an enjoyable way as I can, and not freak out over things that happen if possible. And that's about where I stand with the Dharma at this point, Dhamma.
Yeah, good for you. The Buddha didn't teach the Dhamma as a way of avoiding dukkha, or even as a way of managing it. He simply taught the Dhamma to say that dukkha is going to arise. Don't build your life around it. Don't react to it from a lack of understanding. Understand the nature. And that sounds like where you're moving. So good for you.
Thank you.
Lisa, good to see you this morning.
Good to see you too, John. The part of what I was reading that was talking about the not self and self-referential. It took me a long time to understand that. I didn't get it.
Yeah.
And I may not totally I'm sure I probably don't. But I think I'm beginning to understand it, because, it's kind of like seeing yourself like the world it's our ego. The world revolves around us. Yep. Like when I said, well, we just happened to come to the first Sangha just randomly. I said, look, this looks interesting. It's a Frenchtown. And then you said, oh, by the way, I'm just starting my annual, introduction to Buddhism, 14 weeks or whatever. Oh, well, that was a coincidence. But I didn't want to, a lot of people will read into that the universe was on their side. I almost kind of said that, even though, I'm sorry, I don't know how to describe it. A lot of people out there, and I think a lot of them are spiritual and religious, see things that happen to them as either God has blessed them, or the universe just came together and all the forces to do this wonderful thing, or
For you personally.
yes.
Yeah.
So, and I kind of see it as the way people used to think that the earth was the center of the universe.
Yeah.
And everything was created. So that's like the whole earth is a big ego, and so,
That's a
and it just,
good view.
It took science and hundreds and hundreds of years, And maybe, is there actually a flat earth society or?
Yeah,
is
there's still people that insist that.
Okay, all right, so there is, it's like a made up thing.
No,
And so just seeing religion as explaining all these things, to me, it seems like the religion is the opposite of Buddhism.
your words, not mine. But yeah, I would say that religion often contradicts what the Buddha taught. So.
In like so many ways.
Yeah.
And then also what you were saying about, so, you know, reading that, because you bring up, you know, in each chapter, a lot of other things are brought up in it, but that was what, I feel like I've made some progress on really understanding that. But the other part of it is, and I guess I'd call it my own personal definition of existential angst. Like,
Existential
where did it all come from? We're never going to find out what happens in the end. You know, we're here for like a blink of an eye, and realizing that. And that's part of dukkha, you know, like we're never going to know.
Yeah, you got me jumping out of my seat. Yes, you're describing gaining insight into the three marks of existence, and it's just that. Wow, we're going to get more. I mean, the whole course gets into a deeper explanation. I think book 6, 7, and 8 on not self and dependent origination and all that. But that's what it is. And when you how do I say this? If I was going to start a new religion today, the first thing I would consider is how can I best address people's dissatisfaction, but not in a way to understand it, as a way to appease it, make people feel good, give them answers, even if the answers don't really relate. Religion has been around long before we understood that the world was not the center of the universe. And at the time, that idea, and again, I'm not putting it down. I'm making the connection is we create scenarios in the world that allow us to maintain our own ignorance. And when scientists first started saying, wait a minute, the universe doesn't revolve around the Earth. In fact, the Earth isn't even the center of the universe. It's stuck on some, edge of the galaxy that's even in. People freaked out all over the world. They couldn't handle it because this now changes. If I think that I'm the center of the universe, it's so much more strongly reinforced when the world that I live in is the center of the universe as well, isn't it? But when I have to start accepting because science says it so, that my world isn't, and maybe I'm not anymore, what happens? And so there's a lot of resistance to just that, just the proof of that the world we live in is not the center of the world, the center of the universe. It's the same kind of resistance to accepting the true nature of the Four Noble Truths. There's a lot of resistance to that. Another way of saying that we create subtle and powerful strategies to continue to ignore our own ignorance is I got to maintain myself as the center of my own little world, at least. I got to be in control of it. And the world needs to fit my view, no matter how wrong my view is. And that's the ongoing stress that we live in. We create the second link in dependent origination. Ignorance gives rise to assumptions, to mental fabrications. That's what that is. That's what that means. Out of ignorance, I'm now seeing the world in a certain way. Even though my experience shows that it only creates stress, I'm holding on to it because it's me. I created it. And the Buddha said, wait a minute. It's those views that are creating, those wrong views that are creating stress for you and confusion and deluded thinking. Here's a way to look at those views, recognize the ones that are rooted in ignorance, and abandon them. Going right back to the first noble truth. So thank you for bringing that up. A profound understanding, Lisa. Thank you. Becky, good to see you this morning.
Good to be here. Well, going through this the second time, I too feel like I'm developing a better understanding. I had a good right effort week this week. I was able to meditate every day for about 15 to 20 minutes. And when you were giving your talk this morning, you said something about the importance of right view. I've been thinking about the Eightfold Path. And I just feel like right view is the sort of doorway to having everything else kind of fall into place.
Yeah.
And I think I've experienced, I feel like I've experienced right view a couple of times during the last year and a half that I've been here. 2 years, I don't quite remember how long it's been. But I don't seem to be, I guess it's very comforting when it happens. And your day is, you have an auspicious day when you can maintain right view. But there's going to be a lot more practice necessary to be able to do it, to be able to maintain it in a consistent way. It's very hard to get away from the distractions and out of the distractions.
Yeah.
It's just, at least though, recognizing that that they are distractions is something that you can use to help. But there are still times when I'm just like buried in the shit and I just don't think I can ever get out, no matter how long I meditate. I just keep plugging along. That's all I can say.
Becky, thank you for a beautiful description of the shit of dukkha and the importance of right effort. Excuse me, I don't think I've ever used that word here.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. You mentioned
It's good to laugh.
it is the auspiciousness of recognizing the Bhattacharya Sutta, the auspiciousness of recognizing a day that's rooted in right view, seeing things clearly, having that mindfulness. And recognizing the importance of maintaining right effort and the refuge of meditation to when the S happens. We got this refuge to come and get out of it. And the importance of seeing distraction as distraction and not recognizing the danger of that,
Yes.
the hurtfulness of distraction rather than clinging to the distractions, and or even justifying, like, why shouldn't I attach myself to things that make me feel good? Well, you can if you want. Everybody's free, but look where it leads you. So, thank you. Judy, good to see you this morning.
Good to be here, John. Great teaching as always. It's always good to hear this again. I have so much to say, but I'm not gonna.
You can.
It's just it's helping me through a difficult time, and just it's helping me to have acceptance about whatever will happen, which I feel really good about. It's just feeling responsible kind of for another person that I have, and that person's determined to be visible in the end. And so that's hard.
Yeah.
But, and I know I can't be responsible for that. So I keep telling myself that that's the hard part. Yeah, but I'm still meditating. And, it's really helping. So, I think it's good.
Thank you. I'm glad you're here. Tell Andrew I said hello.
I will.
Don, good to see you this morning.
Good to be here this morning. I just think I'm hearing everything I need to hear this morning. Yeah, I don't really have a whole lot to say either. For me, being the center of the universe is like the height of egotism. That is ego. That is, and there's a great sentence or two. I think it's in the description of the second noble truth about how the ego personality forms.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great description. I love it, and it really sums that up nicely for me. So yeah, it's I'm feeling a lot of peace this morning. I'm not feeling a lot of distraction, which is nice because my crazy mind sees distraction as part of the big scheme, a big strategy, and that's my mind goes to those crazy places, and it's nice to not have to go to those places.
Yeah, it is. Thank you. Again, that's the framework of the Eightfold Path. But distraction is the big strategy. In a very real way, the world is a system designed to continue to encourage distraction with everything that's out there. And again, that's not good or bad, right or wrong. It's just the nature of the world. The Buddha realized that 2,600 years ago. Not seeing yourself as the center of the universe, as the most important view around, brings great freedom. You don't have to control everything. Everything doesn't have to be the way you want it to be, because it really doesn't affect you. And we stop taking life personally. And then we're able to see the discreteness of the arising and passing away of all phenomena in a very practical way. Kevin described that. The phenomena of a friend coming into existence and going out of existence. There's circumstances around that. There's an entire situation around that particular one, but it's still an impersonal experience. It's the nature of life, the nature of human life. The Buddha learned, and we are learning, we're developing a profound understanding of the difference between acceptance and approval. As our minds develop and become well integrated in the Eightfold Path, we learn to accept everything because it's what's occurring. But skillfully, we don't have to approve or disapprove of anything because it's just what's occurring. And then we're able to deal with things in a very meaningful and mindful way. Another way of saying that is we can deal with things without losing our minds. We can stay present. And that's when life takes on its most profound meaning, because we're simply in the flow of our own life. We're simply present with our life as life occurs without the need for it to be any different than it is. There's a lot of freedom and power in that. Lorna, good to see you.
I just wanted to say everything that Becky said. I think she just summed everything up so perfectly. We have, one or two Saga members have talked about very stressful situations. Very stressful. I have had a lot of relief from the Buddha teachings in my stress in my life. And I've had situations that I think other people think they should have been more stressful than they were to me. And I've reflected on that as hoping that I'm not becoming sort of some kind of hard person because I don't react to a stressful situation or an unpleasant situation as stressfully as others. And sometimes then I reflect back on myself that maybe I'm just kind of phoning up to life too much almost, you know.
Mm.
Although I don't think that's really the case, but in situations such as Kevin mentioned, you know, you do wonder that should I be this calm, you know, and I have had those thoughts. But anyway, I haven't really much to say about, you know, I've had sort of a average to below average week, I think, at the moment, but things will change hopefully.
Thank you. That because of conditioned thinking, when we start developing a calm and peaceful mind and we're not reacting like other people might be reacting around us or the way we think that other people expect us to react, there can be that, it's almost a kind of doubt, you know. I'm not acting the way other people expect me to act. Am I doing the right thing? But that's just that conditioned groupthink mentality. You know, the point is we are developing a calm and peaceful mind, and we don't react, and we're able to be more effectively present for other people. And that's the nature of the Dhamma. That when the Buddha described an awakened human being's mind, he described that in one word: calm. So no matter what is occurring around us, we're able to respond appropriately, but we don't have to lose our minds over it. And it doesn't mean that we might find a situation where we're crying, you know, because something is so sad. That's appropriate, you know. It's the Buddha taught the middle way. The Eightfold Path has a middle way, which means that it allows us, in fact, encourages us to be fully human without the need for ourselves to be any different. And so that means that in the moment we hear something awful, we're sad, but we don't have to lose our minds over it. Or anything else. Something wonderful happens to a friend of ours and we feel happy. It's not because of attachment, it's just because that's a wonderful experience. We're here to experience life as it occurs in a completely mindful and appropriate way. And so sometimes life will be full of great happiness and feelings of great fulfillment. But if we don't hold on to those things, it's just in that moment, it's appropriate. And there'll be times when life feels devastating and we might be full of fear, but it's appropriate when that's occurring. Doesn't need to be any different. And as life unfolds and the impermanence of each situation changes, we change in accordance with the situation. And our minds always remain at calm and at peace. Thank you. Mary, good to see you. How are you?
Good to be here. I did not read the chapter. This week I just was a little still overwhelmed over my mother's death and getting through that, which was, you know, we were waiting for the other shoe to drop for quite a while. She had dementia.
Yeah.
But it's still, you know, kind of, it definitely pulled the rug out from under me.
Yeah.
It's coming back down under the waves, but I try to go with the flow and have emerged back above the surface of the water.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say this whole practice has helped me immensely through everything that's gone on for the last, you know, almost 2 years now. Without this practice, I think I would really be mired in the muck.
Yeah.
I am able to function. And I have a brief monkey on my back, but I'm able to function with it there and accept that it's there and move forward.
Yeah. Thank you, Mary. Yeah, it's appropriate that it's there. Well, I'll talk about that in just a minute. Debbie, good to see you this morning.
Yeah, I guess I'm getting more and more clear, and I'm really relating to everything everyone's saying, and I'm getting more and more clear that I also create my own dukkha, you know, it's like creating it all the time with my conditioned thinking. And then there's moments, you know, when there's breakthroughs and that feels good. And last night, after a long week, I came home and one of the things my spouse does is she has a Tai Chi practice, and she does that every day. And it keeps her in her peaceful place and more grounded. And sometimes it's like the same moment we'll we're starting to have a discussion and we'll both get it. Like, you know, we're going to this place, dukkha. It's so wonderful when, I mean, because sometimes it's me, sometimes, but it's like so wonderful when you realize together. It's like we thought, and she went and got the music and put on the music and dance, and we just changed everything.
Wow.
It was just such a beautiful shift because we both, it was so interesting at the same time. We just, okay, here we are, we're going into this place of shit, that's, that's very so articulate, said it. And so, it's like helpful to every once in a while have these breakthroughs.
Yeah.
Be able to find that other space that we can be in the moment. We can just have this wonderful, peaceful moment, not be in it, So that was a nice lesson.
That's remarkable. Thank you. Yeah, you recognize in the moment that this is just impermanent. There's nothing here. So let's dance.
Yeah.
That really is great. If I can, Debbie, I just want to use you for an example for just a moment, if I can, without making you too self-conscious, based on what you brought up again last week about see this, and isn't this too rigid or maybe too narrowly focused, meaning the Dhamma. And yet you continued, even though you had those doubts, and they formed a very particular view, which is somewhat common. You engaged in right effort and you kept persevering despite your doubts. And now you just described, you're reaping the benefits of it, and the real practical benefits of it. That's the recognizing dukkha in the moment, like you did with your partner, is the essence of it. It's just here. So what? Let's dance. Why not? Why not enjoy ourselves? Why not maintain a peaceful mind or even a playful mind? Good for you. We've been talking a little bit about the impermanence of physical life. We've been talking a lot about that. I'm going to put it that way. About a little over 2 weeks ago, I talked about being with my mom when she died, and it was a long illness. And so about 2 weeks ago Thursday, my younger sister, the baby, died. She had ALS for many years. And obviously when somebody's that sick, it's coming. There was no surprise or anything like what Kevin went through or others. But the experience was for me. So my brother called. I wasn't there when it happened, and said Susie died. Rather than reacting out of any kind of why did this happen, or getting too over exaggerated with it, obviously it was a relief for me. But what I was able to experience was the appreciation of having her as my sister, which is what happened. For 53 years, I get to have. I remember she's the one that I remember coming home from the hospital. I got 5 brothers and sisters, but she's the one that I remember. So, and there was always a connection there. But much like I felt with my mother when she passed, it was enough that I had her in my life, and I understood that this is what 53 years is pretty short, but that's what she had. And wasn't it wonderful to have her in my life for that 53 years? And the other things about, how could it happen and why did she get sick? And, they didn't even come up. It was just the way it was. And I'm not saying that to tell you how wonderfully awakened I am, but to just show how the Dhamma helps maintain reality of what's occurring. A sister died. I was able to stay present with it. We made the arrangements. I still feel sad about it. I still miss Susan. I mean, even my mom's been dead about eight or 9 years now, I think. And I still, out of conditioned thinking, there's still every now and then this thought pops into my mind. Something happens. I got to call mom and let her know. Still have that thought, but it doesn't lead me to melancholy or despair. It's just when I have the thought, I'm going to call mom. It's that same thought. Wasn't it wonderful to have a mother that I had like that for all those years? How fortunate I was. And that leads me to stay in a place of mind where I realize how fortunate I am to have a human life. Why? Because I can have these experiences and they can lead to my own awakening. And I can maintain a mind of calm and peace no matter what's occurring. And be fully present, to understand what human life is really about, just like the Buddha described. It's remarkable. And we have a way of that we can all do that. The experiences in life, we've all had this, are just as the Buddha described. They run the whole gamut of extreme suffering and emotional turmoil to extreme bliss. And we've all had, and everything in between. And every one of us has had all those experiences. It's part of life. We can't decide we're only going to have one experience. And that experience has to fuel my happiness, or I don't want anything else. That's unrealistic. That's a distraction. That's why we keep chasing things that are continued distraction. That's why we continue to ignore our own ignorance, because we won't only want to have one narrow type of experience, or we only want to live in an internal mental environment that has all the answers. But it's not possible. We're just kidding ourselves, aren't we? Rather than awaken, as the Buddha described awakening, we're simply present with life as life unfolds. We're mindfully present and we see it from right view. We understand no matter what's occurring in life, dukkha will occur. And when it occurs, it's not personal in any way. It's not happening to me. Nothing or nobody is working against me or pulling strings to make my life more difficult. You brought up an important point. A synchronicity in life is seemingly occurring because of me. God made John start the Truth of Happiness course when it was just the right time for me. Well, what's happened is it happens once a year, and it's auspicious. The Dhamma is always auspicious, but it's not personal. It's just what's occurring. And we can take that, understanding the impermanence. Let me finish this by saying the Buddha's last teaching was included in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, the last teaching of the Buddha's life. And it encompasses about the last 90 days of the Buddha's life. But the last thing the Buddha ever said, at the end of that sutta, the Buddha declared, Ananda was begging the Buddha for one last teaching. Please give me a teaching. What are we going to do without you? And the Buddha said, I'm not like a teacher with a closed fist. I've held nothing back. I've given you everything you need to awaken. Impermanence and decay is relentless. Strive diligently for your own awakening. And he passed away. Think of all the things that an awakened human being could have put importance on. And what he put importance on was striving diligently for our own awakening. It's up to us. It's not up to anything else or anybody else or any other condition. It's up to us. We can develop right here, right now, in this human life, an ongoing life of lasting peace and happiness, even though dukkha will occur. And I think we describe that in a pretty beautiful way. Even when some devastating things have happened to us, we're able to maintain that mind of equanimity. It's the answer. So thank you all. Any other questions or comments about today's class? A quick announcement. The retreat registration is up and ready on the website. There's an email going out tomorrow to kind of remind you. But the info is on the website May 17th to the 20th. When and if you decide to go, please just sign up as soon as you can. It helps my planning and my logistics greatly. This week, we're going to be starting the 3 weeks on the Eightfold Path. So you'll read that chapter on the wisdom, the wisdom factors of the Eightfold Path, and I'll talk about that. I'll talk about that. We'll discuss that next week. So let's finish with metta, as we always do. So find your relaxed meditative posture. Gently close your eyes and gently close your mouths. And take a moment to become mindful of your in-breath and your out-breath. And these are the words from the Buddha on the metta from the Karaniya Metta Sutta. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties, and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud or demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. Wishing, in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short, or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings. Radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will. Whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. By not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. Thank you all for a wonderful class. Peace.
Thank you, John.
If you could pick up the Zafus and